Another desk jockey who thinks she can wrench on my vehicles? Get her out of here. I need a real mechanic, not someone who's going to break a nail. The laughter from the assembled motor pool crew was greasy and immediate, a chorus of cheap complicity. Gunnery Sergeant Miller, a man whose belly strained the fabric of his camouflage utilities as much as his ego strained the patience of his superiors, gestured dismissively toward the woman standing beside the dead Humvee. She didn't flinch. She didn't scowl. She didn't even look at him. Master Sergeant Eva Rostova simply knelt, unrolling a small canvas sheet with the deliberate care of a surgeon arranging her instruments. The harsh, unforgiving sun of the Afghan forward operating base beat down, baking the dust and despair into the very air. Yet, her movements were cool, economical, and infuriatingly calm. A few yards away, leaning against the sun-bleached canvas of the command post, General Abrams watched. He didn't see a desk jockey. He saw the almost invisible ink of a tattoo just above the cuff of her sleeve, a design she instinctively kept half-hidden, a coiled snake intertwined with a dagger. He saw her posture, the way her weight was balanced perfectly on the balls of her feet, a portrait of coiled potential. He saw the profound silence that surrounded her, a silence that was not empty, but full of unspoken history. If you believe competence is proven by actions, not assumptions, type "prove it" below. The scene was one of controlled chaos, a microcosm of the entire war effort. A critical patrol was delayed, held hostage by this one inert hunk of metal. The Humvee, an armored M1151, was more than just a vehicle. It was a lifeline, an armor-plated promise of return. Gunnery Sergeant Miller's team had been crawling over it for 6 agonizing hours, their diagnostic laptops throwing up a cascade of nonsensical error codes. Finally, defeated and greasy, Miller had declared it a lost cause, a fatal engine block failure requiring a full replacement they didn't have the time or the parts for. That was when the call came down from SOJTF Command, a sterile voice informing Miller that a subject matter expert was being sent to assist. He had expected a senior warrant officer, a grizzled veteran with engine grease permanently etched into his knuckles. Instead, he got her, Master Sergeant Rostova. Her uniform was immaculate, her hands were clean, and she carried a single, unassuming tool bag. Miller's prejudice, born from decades of territorial pride, had found its perfect target. "What's she gonna do?" he sneered to his crew, his voice a stage whisper meant for her ears. "Check its email? Reboot the damn thing." Rostova ignored him, her focus absolute. She placed each tool on her canvas roll, a specific multimeter, a set of torque wrenches, a small spool of wire. Each movement a testament to a discipline far beyond his comprehension. Her silence was her shield, but it was also a weapon, a quiet indictment of his loud, blustering incompetence. The challenge was laid bare: resurrect the dead. Where Miller's team had attacked the problem with loud frustration and heavy tools, Rostova began with stillness. She didn't plug in a computer. She closed her eyes for a moment, listening, not just with her ears, but with her whole being, sensing the subtle disharmonies in the machine. The men watched, their smirks slowly freezing on their faces. Her hands began to move, tracing wiring harnesses deep within the engine bay, her fingers reading the vehicle like Braille. She moved with a liquid efficiency that was both mesmerizing and unsettling. There was no wasted motion, no hesitation. It was a dance of pure competence. She bypassed the main diagnostic port, clipping her multimeter onto a specific set of pins on a secondary control module, a module Miller didn't even know existed. He watched, his arms crossed, a contemptuous sneer fixed on his face. "Enjoying the tour?" he drawled. She didn't respond. Her eyes were focused on the meter's display, watching the numbers flicker with an intensity that seemed to bend them to her will. She was not merely looking for a fault. She was interrogating the machine, forcing it to confess its secrets. The quiet confidence she exuded was a stark contrast to the clatter and curses that had filled the motor pool for the last 6 hours. It was the sound of a professional at work, and that sound was silence. She tracked the electrical goes through the vehicle's nervous system. Her methodical process, a live-fire lesson in diagnostics. The fault wasn't a massive, catastrophic failure, but something far more insidious. A tiny, hairline fracture in a single wire within a heavily shielded harness, located in a spot so inaccessible it was deemed a no-service area by the manufacturer. It was a one-in-a-million flaw, a gremlin that would have sent this vehicle back to Germany on a pallet. For Rostova, it was Tuesday. From her kit, she produced a specialized piercing probe and a small spool of military-grade wire. With the steady hands of a bomb disposal technician, she performed a microsurgical bypass, creating a new, clean path for the electrical current. She didn't rip the old harness out. She rendered it obsolete with a single, elegant solution that took less than 5 minutes. When she was done, she didn't offer a triumphant speech. She simply clipped the leads off, secured the new wire with 2 perfectly cinched zip ties, and wiped a single smudge of grease from her knuckle with a clean cloth. She stepped back from the engine bay and gave a single, small nod to the young corporal in the driver's seat. He looked at Gunny Miller, who just shrugged in disbelief. The corporal turned the key. The engine, silent and cold for a quarter of a day, exploded to life with a ferocious, perfect roar. A wave of stunned, absolute silence washed over the motor pool, a vacuum so profound it was louder than the engine itself. Miller's jaw hung open, his face a mask of shattered arrogance. "No," he whispered. "That's not possible." General Abrams pushed himself off the canvas wall and began walking toward the Humvee. The motor pool, still reeling in shock, snapped to a clumsy semblance of attention as the 2-star general moved through their ranks. His steps were measured, his expression unreadable. He didn't even glance at the now-purring engine. He walked past a pale and trembling Gunnery Sergeant Miller without a flicker of acknowledgement. His destination was the quiet professional standing by the front tire, already packing her tools away. He stopped directly in front of her. The entire FOB seemed to hold its breath. "Master Sergeant," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the unmistakable weight of command. He gestured not at the engine, but at her wrist, where the snake and dagger tattoo was now fully visible. 75th Ranger Regiment, he stated, not as a question, but as a fact. "I haven't seen one of those up close since my days at Fort Benning. You were Regimental Support Detachment." He was testing her, seeing if she would take the simpler, more plausible out. Rostova met his gaze, her own eyes clear and direct. "Negative, sir," she said, her voice the first thing most of them had heard her say all day. "I was an 18 Charlie, Special Forces Engineer Sergeant. 3rd Group." The revelation detonated in the still air. An 18 Charlie, a Green Beret, not just a mechanic, but a master of demolition, construction, unconventional warfare, and, most pertinently, fixing absolutely anything with nothing. The term mechanic was an insult to the profession. They were miracle workers who operated in the dark, behind enemy lines, where a broken engine was a death sentence. Gunnery Sergeant Miller looked as if he'd been physically struck. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Her silence, her precision, her custom tools, her impossible success. General Abrams let the weight of that sink in before he turned to face the assembled crowd. His voice dropped, losing its conversational tone and taking on the hard edge of a man who had buried too many soldiers. "Let me be perfectly clear for everyone here," he said, his eyes sweeping over them, landing hard on Miller. "This is not a desk jockey. This is Master Sergeant Eva Rostova. She has more logged hours fixing vehicles under direct enemy fire than your entire shop has in garrison. She was the lead field engineer for Task Force Raptor's clandestine mobility program. The reason your state-of-the-art diagnostics couldn't find the problem," he paused for effect, "is because she wrote the foundational code for the software you're using. Her last duty station wasn't behind a desk. It was so far off the grid, it doesn't appear on any of our maps." He turned back to Rostova. Then, in a gesture that sent shockwaves through the ranks, General Abrams, a 2-star commander, rendered a slow, formal salute to the Master Sergeant. It was the ultimate sign of respect, an official validation of a quiet legend. The story spread through the FOB like a flash fire. They called it the Ghost and the Gunny. It was whispered in Chow lines, relayed over encrypted nets, and became instant folklore among the enlisted ranks. The tale of the quiet master sergeant who had humbled the loudest mouth in the motor pool was a cautionary tale and an inspirational epic rolled into one. Mechanics from other units would make pilgrimages to Miller's shop, asking to see the Humvee, now nicknamed the Phantom, as if it were a holy relic. They spoke of Rostova in hushed, reverent tones. She was no longer just a master sergeant. She was an archetype, a living embodiment of the quiet professional. The most profound change, however, occurred within Gunnery Sergeant Miller himself. The bluster and arrogance were gone, replaced by a quiet, haunted humility. The next morning, he found Rostova as she prepared to board a helicopter out of the FOB. He approached her not with a sneer, but with a peace offering, a steaming cup of coffee, the best he could make. "Master Sergeant," he began, his voice rough with contrition. "I was wrong. I was ignorant. And I was an ass." He hesitated, looking at the ground. "If you have time before you leave, could you show my guys what you did? On a schematic? I want them to learn." Rostova took the coffee, her expression unchanging. She looked at this broken, humbled man and saw not an enemy, but a student. "Of course, Gunny," she said simply. There was no "I told you so" no victory lap. Her competence required no such reinforcement. For the next 20 minutes, she didn't just show him the fix. She explained the philosophy behind it. She talked about systems thinking, about looking beyond the obvious symptoms to find the root cause, about how the most complex machines often have the simplest points of failure. She sketched the wiring bypass on the back of a maintenance form with a grease pencil. Her impromptu lesson was about more than just electronics. It was a masterclass in humility and analytical rigor. When the helicopter's rotors began to spin, she handed the schematic to Miller. He took it like it was the 10 Commandments. He walked back to his motor pool and, without a word, pinned the greasy schematic to the central toolboard, right in the spot where a pin-up calendar had been that morning. It became a sacred text. The mechanics would study it, copy it, and internalize its lesson. The Rostova bypass became a standard procedure in their shop, a permanent monument to the day a ghost in the machine taught them that true expertise doesn't need to raise its voice. Months later, the FOB was a ghost town, being packed up and handed back to the desert. General Abrams was on his final walkthrough, a farewell tour of the place that had consumed a year of his life. He stopped by the motor pool, a place he now associated with a profound lesson in leadership. The shop was immaculate, the tools clean, the atmosphere one of quiet, focused work. A new sergeant was in charge, but Miller's influence remained. Pinned to the main board, now framed in scavenged plexiglass, was the greasy schematic. The general smiled faintly and asked the young sergeant about it. "That's the Rostova schematic, sir," the sergeant said with pride. "Gunny Miller made it part of our induction. He drilled it into us. He said it's not about fixing a wire. It's about learning to see the whole system. He used to say that assumptions are a more dangerous enemy than any, i.e., Rostova was gone, likely in some other forgotten corner of the world, fixing some other impossible problem in silence. But her legacy was right here, embedded in the culture, passed down from one NCO to another. It was a legacy of competence. True strength is rarely found in the boastful threat or the loud proclamation of authority. It resides in the quiet corners of competence, in the steady hands that solve the unsolvable problem while others are still complaining about it. It lives in the deafening silence that follows a moment of impossible skill, a silence that says more than 1,000 words of praise. Legacy isn't a statue or a medal. It is a lesson learned, a standard raised, a piece of wisdom passed into the hands of the next generation. It's the hum of a perfectly repaired engine, the respect earned in the grease and the dirt, and the knowledge that the most valuable person in the room is often the one you notice last. Is the quiet professional who proves, time and again, that what you speak so loudly that no one can hear what you're saying. The world is saved, fixed, and advanced not by the loud, but by the competent, who ask for no credit and require no applause, their reward simply being the work itself. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud ignorance, and where professional skill defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.